I've been a freelance wildlife photographer for about 12 years. Most of my work is solo remote stuff. I'm usually camping out for days at a time in places nobody else is going to. I actually prefer it that way. Or at least I used to. Story 1, the tracking job. This happened about 3 years ago. I'd been hired to document elk migration patterns in a remote stretch of forest in Montana. Remote doesn't even begin to describe it. It was 8 miles of hiking just to reach where I set up camp. I filed my route with the local ranger station like I always do, and I packed 10 days worth of supplies. The first 3 days went smooth. I got some incredible shots, logged everything, and made it back to camp before dark each day. The forecast had called for cold and possible snow, and that's pretty much what I got. By the 4th day though, things started to change. We got way more snow than expected. I'd planned to hike out to a ridge about 2 miles from camp to catch the elk at dawn, but the terrain was all hidden rocks and icy slopes under fresh snow. The worst possible conditions to hike through. I was making my way down a short embankment when my boot hit a patch of ice I never saw. One wrong step like that and you could die. And I mean that literally. I slid probably 20 feet before catching myself on a fallen log. I was lucky not to have slid further, but the pain in my left knee was instant. I tried to tell myself I was fine, but the moment I stood up, I knew something was wrong. I couldn't put much weight on that leg, and I knew it would be hours before I'd be able to walk normally. I was so mad at myself, but there was nothing I could do. I abandoned the rest of the day's work right there. No photos worth getting stranded over. I painfully made my way back uphill to the main trail and started the slow hike back toward camp. But after a few minutes, I noticed boot tracks in the snow that I didn't recognize. They weren't mine. They were bigger, deeper, and they looked fresh. Sharp edges despite the falling snow. They were heading in the same direction I was going. I figured it was probably a hunter or maybe another photographer. It's not unusual to cross paths with people out there, even in remote areas. I didn't think much of it. I just kept moving, trying to keep as much weight off my knee as possible. As the light started fading, I began hearing sounds behind me. At first, I chalked it up to normal forest noises, but the more I listened, the more it sounded like footsteps. I kept turning around and looking over my shoulder, but I couldn't see anything. That part of the forest was pretty dense, though, so if someone was following me, there's a good chance I wouldn't be able to see them anyway. I stopped walking and the sound stopped too. Not right away. There was a delay of maybe 1 or 2 seconds, but they stopped. I froze up and tried to listen for anything out of the ordinary, but there was nothing beyond the wind and snow. I started walking again, and this time the footsteps didn't resume immediately, so I thought everything was good. But then a few minutes later, I heard those damn footsteps again. I kept turning around, but I couldn't see anything. It was especially freaky because I knew I wouldn't be able to run if there was a threat out there. That was the worst part. I would have loved to confront whoever it was or try to put distance between us, but I didn't have the mobility to do so. So I just kept moving. Then I heard something that made my blood run cold. A whistle. A human whistle. Coming from somewhere to my left, deep in the trees. It wasn't a tune or anything recognizable. Just a single, long whistle. Like someone calling a dog. I stopped dead in my tracks and listened. Nothing. Just silence and snow. I looked down at the trail and noticed something that made my stomach drop. The boot tracks I'd been following were gone. I turned around frantically, trying to see where they had branched off. That's when I saw them. A second set of tracks coming out of the tree line on my left, running parallel to mine through the snow. Whoever had been ahead of me on the trail was now walking alongside me through the trees. Close, maybe 30 feet away. At that point, I was so scared I wasn't thinking straight. I should have kept my mouth shut. I should have just kept going. But instead I called out. Hello? Is someone there? I didn't get an answer. And after about 20 seconds of waiting, I knew I had to get out of there. My knee was still killing me, so I couldn't move that fast. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. I was pretty close to camp though, so I told myself if I just kept moving, I'd be fine. I wasn't hearing footsteps behind me anymore, which was good. But I knew there was someone out there. Someone who had deliberately moved off the trail to walk parallel to me through the trees. I was really close to my campsite when I heard the sound of a heavy branch snapping from somewhere behind me. It obviously wasn't a natural sound, or I wouldn't bother mentioning it. I didn't stop moving. I kept thinking about how if I just made it back, I'd be good. And eventually, I did reach my campsite. It was fully dark at that point, and only after getting inside my tent did I realize I wasn't any safer in there than I had been hobbling through the woods. I started packing immediately. My stupid knee made it so hard to move quickly, but I tried my best to rush. I'd say maybe 70% of how scared I was due to the fact that in a fight or a chase, I would be completely screwed without the ability to move properly. Before I finished packing, I heard the thing I had been dreading the whole time. Footsteps right outside the tent. I was so unbelievably scared at that point, and I started thinking about all my options. The footsteps weren't approaching my tent, but rather circling it. There was nothing I could do but wait. The sounds of them circling went on for what felt like 10 minutes before everything went quiet. I hadn't heard whoever was out there walk away, but I didn't care. I was leaving. I finished packing and took a really deep breath before unzipping my tent and stepping out into the snow. The moment I got outside, I looked into the trees and my heart nearly stopped. There was a person standing in the tree line, maybe 40 feet away, staring at me. It was too dark to make out details, but I could see the silhouette clearly against the snow. Tall, motionless, just watching. I stared back, frozen. I was fully expecting them to charge at me, but they didn't. I put my hands up and said, "I'm leaving. I don't want any trouble." They didn't respond. The staring contest lasted what felt like minutes before they finally spoke. "You shouldn't be out here alone." The voice was male, low and rough. "I'm leaving right now," I said, my voice shaking. "Good," the man said. Then he turned and disappeared into the woods. The rest of that night is pretty blurry, partly because I was still in so much pain and partly because of sheer terror. If that guy had wanted to attack me, he probably could have, with my knee all messed up. There would have been nothing I could have done. I finished packing and left, not even caring about it being dark. I hiked through the night, checking over my shoulder every few minutes. When I eventually got checked out, I was told I had a torn meniscus, and it was a miracle I hadn't done more damage by walking on it. I ended up reporting the encounter to the ranger station, but I knew nothing would come of it. They told me they'd increase patrols in the area, but I doubt they ever found anyone. I didn't take another solo winter assignment for almost 2 years. I still do remote work. It's my livelihood and I'm good at it, but I don't camp alone on winter assignments anymore. I either bring someone with me or I turn the job down. This is still the scariest thing that has ever happened to me. Story 2, the emergency shelter. I've lived in Maine most of my life. My family moved to a small town near Baxter State Park when I was 8 and I never really left. I spent my summers working at outdoor education camps as a teenager, started guiding professionally in my early 20s, and that's basically been my life ever since. I'm 32 now. I work seasonally as a wilderness guide in northern Maine, and I've been doing it long enough that I don't really get rattled much out there. I don't get lost. Or I guess I should say I didn't think I could get lost, because what happened 2 years ago kind of forced me to reconsider that. My girlfriend at the time was Amy. She grew up in rural Vermont and was basically the female version of me when it came to the outdoors. Actually, that's not really fair to her because she was probably more experienced than me in certain areas, like orienteering specifically. We'd been together about 3 years, and most of our relationship revolved around trips that would make normal couples absolutely miserable. Week-long backpacking trips where you actually have to plan or you'll be in serious trouble. The plan was to hike a 40-mile loop through the backcountry. We'd camp at designated sites along the way and be back to the car in 5 days. We'd done similar trips before and it was always fine. The weather forecast looked good when we left, so we weren't worried at all. The first 2 days were completely uneventful. We made good time, the weather held, and we were actually ahead of schedule. The third morning, I woke up and realized there was a storm rolling in. The forecast had called for clear skies, but clearly something had changed. Amy and I decided to keep moving. We had plenty of food and could hunker down at the next shelter if we needed to, but we wanted to at least make it there before the weather got too bad. Things went south really quickly. The rain came first, then sleet, then the temperature dropped and everything got icy. We were scrambling over a rocky section when Amy slipped. 1 second she was fine, the next she was on the ground holding her ankle. I knew immediately it was bad. The way she was grimacing, the way she couldn't put any weight on it. I helped her over to a flat spot and took off her boot to assess the damage. Her ankle was already swelling. "Can you walk?" I asked. "I don't know," she said through gritted teeth. She tried standing and immediately sat back down. "No, I can't." My mind started racing. We were at least 15 miles from the trailhead. No cell service. And a storm was getting worse by the minute. I pulled out the map. There was an emergency shelter marked about 2 miles from our current position. Not an official campsite, just an old hunting shelter that hikers sometimes used. "We need to get to that shelter," I said. "Can you make it 2 miles if I help you?" Amy nodded. "I'll try." It took us almost 3 hours to cover those 2 miles. Amy was tough as hell, but I could tell she was in agony. The sleet turned to snow and visibility dropped to almost nothing. By the time we found the shelter, it was late afternoon and we were both exhausted and soaked through. The shelter was exactly what I expected. A three-sided wooden structure with a roof, open to the elements on one side. There was a fire pit and some old cutwood stacked in the corner. We got inside and I helped Amy into her sleeping bag. Then I got a fire going. As the shelter warmed up, I started feeling better about our situation. We had food, water, shelter. Amy's ankle was bad, but it wasn't life-threatening. We just have to wait out the storm and then figure out how to get her out of there. That's when I noticed something that made me uneasy. There were things in the shelter that shouldn't have been there. A camping chair in the corner. A cooler. Some rope coiled on one of the beams. Someone's been here recently, I said to Amy. Maybe another hiker, she said. Maybe. But something felt off. The items looked too settled, too organized. Like someone had been living here, not just passing through. I walked to the back of the shelter and found something that made my stomach drop. A notebook, just sitting on the floor next to the wall. I picked it up and opened it. Inside were entries, dates, descriptions of people who had come through the area. August 12th, 2 men, 30s heading north. Blue packs. August 19th, woman, solo, 20s, red jacket. Camped at Site 4. September 2nd, couple, young, anniversary trip mentioned. Stayed at shelter overnight. I kept flipping through. Page after page of observations. Some entries had additional notes. Followed to ridge. Lost sight at sunset. Returned to vehicle September 4th. Log plates. My hands started shaking. Someone had been watching hikers. Tracking them. Taking notes on their movements. Amy, I said quietly. We need to leave. What? Why? I showed her the notebook. Her eyes widened as she read. Oh my God, she whispered. That's when we heard it. Footsteps outside the shelter. Crunching through the snow. We both froze. The footsteps stopped right outside the open side of the shelter. A man stepped into view. He was probably in his 50s, wearing old hunting gear. He looked at us with no expression on his face. This is my shelter, he said calmly. We're sorry, I said, standing up. We didn't know. My girlfriend hurt her ankle and we needed to get out of the storm. He looked at Amy, then back at me. You're not supposed to be here. We'll leave, I said. We just need to. You can't leave in this weather, he interrupted. You'll die out there. He was right. The storm had gotten worse. We couldn't see more than 10 feet beyond the shelter. We'll leave first thing in the morning, I said. The man walked into the shelter and sat down in the camping chair. He pulled out a thermos and poured himself some coffee, completely calm. You read my notebook, he said. It wasn't a question. I didn't answer. I watch this area, he continued. I make sure people stay safe. Make sure they don't get lost or do anything stupid. That's good, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Some people don't appreciate it, he said. Some people think it's strange that I keep track of who comes through here. Amy grabbed my hand. I could feel her shaking. We sat in terrible silence for what felt like hours. The man just drank his coffee and stared at the fire. Finally, he stood up. I'm going to check my traps. You two stay here. Don't touch my things. He walked out into the snow and disappeared. The second he was gone, I started packing our stuff. We have to go, I whispered to Amy. I don't care about the storm. We have to go right now. I can barely walk, Amy said, tears in her eyes. I'll carry you if I have to. I got Amy on her feet and we started moving. The pain must have been excruciating, but she didn't complain. We made it maybe half a mile before I saw a light ahead through the trees. Another shelter. A real one marked on the map. We practically fell inside. There were 2 other hikers there, a couple in their 60s who'd been riding out the storm. I told them everything. About Amy's ankle, about the man, about the notebook. The older man pulled out a satellite phone, something we should have had but didn't, and called for help. A ranger reached us the next morning. They evacuated Amy on a stretcher and sent a team to investigate the first shelter. They found it exactly as we'd left it. The notebook, the camping chair, all of it. But they never found the man. They searched the area for days. No sign of him. The ranger told us that shelter had been abandoned for years. No one was supposed to be living there. Amy and I broke up about 6 months after the incident. It had nothing to do with what happened, but I still think about it all the time. There are really only 2 explanations for what happened that day, and neither of them are good. The first is that the man was real and he's still out there. Still watching hikers. Still taking notes. And the rangers just couldn't find him. The second is something I don't even want to consider. Story 3, the trail date. When I was a senior in high school, there was this girl I spent a lot of time thinking about. Her name was Morgan Hayes. She had this mysterious presence about her that's kind of hard to explain, but I'll try my best. She was really pretty, of course, but it was more than that. She had this quiet confidence that I found fascinating. She wasn't popular, and I got the impression that a lot of people were more intimidated by her than anything else. She didn't talk much in class, and she always sat alone at lunch. I didn't find that weird though. I actually found her uniqueness kind of intriguing. I was into photography at the time, nature photography specifically, so that probably had something to do with why I was drawn to her. She seemed to appreciate solitude the same way I did. Anyway, I was walking through the hallway one day when I literally bumped into her. My books went everywhere and she helped me pick them up. As she handed me my nature photography textbook, she smiled and said, "You like the outdoors?" I said yes, and we started talking. Just small talk at first, but it was more than I'd ever gotten from her before. That's when something came over me. Right there in the hallway, I asked if she wanted to go on a hike sometime. She didn't even hesitate. She said yes and gave me her number. A week later, we were in her car driving to a trail she'd picked. I'd never been to it, and neither had anyone I knew. The drive was about an hour, and Morgan was quieter than she'd been in the hallway. She had music playing, indie stuff I didn't recognize, and her window was down despite the cold. We pulled into a gravel parking area at the base of the trail. There were maybe 3 other cars there. Morgan grabbed a backpack from her trunk and started walking. I followed. For the first 30 minutes or so, things were actually great. Morgan was more talkative than usual. She asked me about my photography, about what I wanted to study in college. The trail narrowed after a while and the trees got denser. We hadn't seen another person since the parking lot. At some point, the trail split into a fork. I asked Morgan which way, and she pointed left without hesitating. "Have you been here before?" I asked. "No," she said. "I just have a good sense of direction." I found that a little strange, especially considering how confident she seemed, but I didn't question it. The left fork was noticeably less maintained than the main trail. Overgrown, harder to follow. I started to get the feeling we were going the wrong way, but I didn't want to seem like I didn't trust her judgment. I must have been really focused on where I was stepping, because at one point I realized I couldn't hear Morgan's footsteps behind me anymore. The trail had gotten so narrow that we were walking single file, and I'd somehow ended up in front. But when I turned around to check on her, she wasn't there. The trail behind me was empty. I called her name. No response. I started walking back the way we'd come, calling for her. I made it back to the fork and she wasn't there either. I figured maybe she'd stopped to tie her shoe or something and didn't want me to wait. But I looked around and realized there was nowhere for her to have gone. No side trails, no clearings. She was just gone. So I decided to check the right fork, thinking maybe she'd gotten ahead of me somehow and taken the other path. That side was even more overgrown than the left. The further I walked, the less it felt like a real trail at all. I kept calling her name, getting more worried by the second. At one point, I heard something moving through the brush to my right. I looked over and saw someone moving between the trees. "Morgan?" I called out. The movement stopped. Then I saw a figure step partially into view. It wasn't Morgan. It was a man. Older, maybe in his 40s. He was staring at me. I froze. "Sorry, I'm just looking for my friend. Have you seen a girl come through here?" The man didn't answer. He just kept staring. Then I heard another sound, this time from my left. I turned and saw a second person. Another man, younger than the first, standing in the trees about 20 feet away. He was holding something. A thick piece of wood like a club. That's when pure instinct took over. I turned and started walking quickly back toward the main trail. But the second man stepped out of the trees, blocking my path. "Where are you going?" he asked. His voice was flat, emotionless. "I'm just trying to find the trail," I said, my voice shaking. "You're on the trail," he said. "The main trail," I clarified, taking a step back. The first man had moved closer. They were both watching me now, slowly closing the distance. I did the only thing I could think of. I ran. I crashed through the underbrush, branches hitting my face, roots trying to trip me. I could hear them running behind me, their footsteps heavy and deliberate. I ran until I found something that looked like a trail, any trail, and followed it, not caring where it led. I ran for what felt like forever until finally, I burst out into a clearing and saw the parking lot ahead. Morgan's car was still there, but the other cars were gone. Morgan was nowhere in sight. I was gasping for air, my heart pounding. I pulled out my phone and called her. It rang once before she picked up. "Where are you?" she asked calmly. "Where am I? Where are you?" I practically yelled. "I'm at the parking lot." "Where did you go?" "I'm at the parking lot too," she said. I looked around. She wasn't there. "No, you're not," I said. "I'm in my car," she said. "Where are you?" I walked toward her car and saw her sitting in the driver's seat, looking at her phone. I yanked open the passenger door. What the hell happened? Where did you go? She looked at me with that same calm expression. What are you talking about? I got back like 10 minutes ago. You were taking forever, so I came back to wait. That's impossible, I said. I walked back to the fork. You weren't there. You must have missed me, she said with a shrug. I was calling your name. I didn't hear you. I stared at her, trying to understand. There were people in the woods. Men. They chased me. For the first time, she looked slightly concerned. Are you okay? No, I'm not okay. They were chasing me and you just disappeared. She started the car. Let's just go. The drive back was the most uncomfortable hour of my life. I kept looking over at her, trying to figure out if she was lying, if she'd somehow set me up. Everything about it felt wrong. The trail she picked, the fork she chose, her disappearing right when those men showed up, then reappearing at the car like nothing happened. We didn't talk the whole way back. When she dropped me off at my house, I got out without saying goodbye. We never spoke again after that. Not at school, not anywhere. I've told this story to a handful of people over the years, and everyone says the same thing. That Morgan set me up. That she knew those men. That she led me out there on purpose. I've considered that more times than I can count. But I just can't figure out why. What would be the point? I have no idea where Morgan is now. She's not on social media. I don't know where she went to college or what she's doing. But sometimes I wonder if she did this to other people. That's just what she did for fun. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder what would have happened if those men had caught me.